Toastmasters and welcome guests. How many of you grew up with a parent telling you a story? Me too. My mom was a children's librarian, and she loved telling us stories. Her father was from Ireland, and it was the tradition there that you told a story at dinner time, and everyone had a little party piece. So whenever there was a party, Uncle Peter would get up and dance a jig, and this is true. Uncle Pat also. Somebody else, Aunt Donna would sing a song. Somebody else might say a poem. Grandpa was big for the poems. There was always something you prepared, but the thing that I loved most was stories. And Mom would take us to the library every week, get a bunch of books. The kids that couldn't read, she'd read the books to them. And many times my dad would come home and the house wasn't cleaned and dinner wasn't made. We were all sitting around reading, and he'd be very annoyed, but I'd be very happy. I grew up loving stories. I love stories to this day. And where do you think I find my stories? Any ideas?
Library.
Well, the library, yes, I do enjoy my books, but the first thing that I go to every morning is the newspaper, and I'm not reading the news, I'm not reading the sports, I don't care about the weather, I'm going right to the advice columns. Those are some juicy stories. I cannot tell you the amazing stories I have read about people catching their neighbors doing something so awful. Recently there was one where a man found out that his wife was actually his sister. Didn't know it, they'd been adopted, had 3 kids, what are they going to do now? Great stories. So the advice columns are just a tremendous source of enjoyment for me, and occasionally I do wonder, did they just make this up? But besides loving the stories in advice columns, I also kind of just want to see what the advice would be. I'll read advice columns about fixing your car. I know nothing about cars, but I'll still read, oh, my odometer's not working, how do I fix it? I'll read virtually anything that is in the form of a question and an answer, just hoping some of it might sink in. My second choice for getting stories is TV. And I remember when we moved to Little Italy, my mother went across the street to meet the neighbors, and one of the neighbors said, oh, I have to go in, my stories are on TV. And my mother said, really? What kind of stories? Oh, good stories, really good stories. And my mom said, really? What channel are you watching them on? Well, I like Channel 7. My mom said, oh, what time do they come on? 1 o'clock, 1 to 3. And my mom said, well, what are they about? Oh, everything. My mom went home, turned on the TV at 1 o'clock, it was soap operas. Mom was so disgusted. I was not. I enjoy my soap operas. Well, soap opera, it's now down to just General Hospital. I do enjoy it for things that are too much for me. They recently had a vampire thing, which I was totally not into. But in general, I'm still enjoying it. I wonder what they're going to bring me. And because of my story history, I can now usually tell about a month in advance who's the killer, who's going to die, who's going to end up pregnant, whose baby it is, but I'm still enjoying it. I also do like to get books. Lest you think I'm entirely lowbrow, I enjoy stories about evolution. I enjoy stories about medical research. I get biographies all the time, but I do have to say, in all fairness, probably 75% of what I read is novels, because those are the stories people make up. Those are the really good ones. I enjoy them a lot. I've been a Toastmaster for over 20 years, and people keep asking me why I still come to Toastmasters. Haven't you learned everything? What more is there? Possibly you can tell I still have some room for improvement, but the main reason I still come is because I estimate that I've heard maybe 1,000 speeches in that time, maybe more. And in that time, I would say I can count on the fingers of one hand the number of stories that have been boring. If you care enough to write a speech about it, even if you're the worst speaker in the world, maybe you've noticed this before, people who are excited about something it's kind of exciting to listen to them. So when they're telling you a story that they really care about, you'll sort of care about it too. And that's the reason I like to come, because I learn lots of exciting things. Sometimes it's fiction, sometimes it's fact, sometimes it's just instruction, but it's almost always somebody who's excited to talk about it. And that's what I get out of Toastmasters. I'm a person who loves stories, and if you tell me a story, I guarantee you I will be happy.
So Shannon, I thought that you did an excellent job, considering the fact that it was impromptu, so you weren't on the schedule to actually do a speech today. I thought it was great. I liked the way that you introduced your speech. You said that you liked telling stories, but there was a background as to why you like telling stories. It had to do with your family and your culture and your tradition. So I liked how you kind of bridged that gap. I thought that you were extremely comfortable. As well, you had a great use of body language and voice.
It's a great speech, knowing that you only had a few minutes to prepare and it was impromptu. I think the content of it was very interesting. When I first heard the name of your speech, which was a story, first thing that came to my mind was, oh my God, it's a little boring. But
apparently we're opposites.
But once you started telling your story, I got engaged right away. And I think just hearing somebody sharing traditions from their families, it's always very interactive and always very interesting, because that gives us the point of reference to compare ourselves, and that comes the you part. Even if you didn't say you, I felt completely involved in it. I like that you made the audience laugh a lot, and I think you had a great introduction and conclusion. At times I could hear a little bit of nervousness in your voice, and maybe sometimes a little rushing too much, but you did a good job getting rid of that after a few moments.
And I learned so much from your speech. I have been told, well, we both have been in Toastmaster 20-some years, right? And so one lady said, well, why do you keep going to Toastmaster? You've been in there so long. Have you learned everything? And I learned something from you tonight, to read that advice column so I can get some ideas about a story. Thank you for sharing that. And how important it is to be a very enthusiastic storyteller as you're relating to the audience, because you can draw the audience in and they might have been ready to be bored, but you're so excited, so it spreads on to them, they get excited. So that's very important. You want to speak to people who are yawning and who are excited. I would like to ask if you would remove that name tag. That was getting on my nerve, that name tag. You have a name tag on your...
Oh, sorry.
And,
work ID.
And avoid looking at the ceiling, because we're right down here. Look at your audience,
I have to say, I thought that was a fantastic impromptu speech. I enjoyed the topic. I was engaged from the word go, so I thought that was neat. I enjoyed your tone. It was very cheerful, pleasant, personable, and got me into the story immediately. So I thought that was very professional. Let's see. I was very entertained. I mean, I'm a story lover too. I never thought to get it from the advice columns. I was like, hey, that's a great idea for some fodder as well. So all in all, I just have to say I was tremendously impressed with you just coming, just right off the cuff, just getting up there and doing such a great job in just over 5 minutes. So I thought that was good.
I'm actually curious about that brother and sister that you were talking about, in particular at the state and what
That's Dear Prudence on Slate Magazine.
But I actually really liked that story because it was a great use of humor. As you can tell, a lot of us were laughing. We were very in the moment, and we're laughing with you. And I think all of us will remember that story. I think you did a great job painting a picture as well even when you were talking about your family, your parents, I think that brought me personally back to moments that I have with my parents growing up, even back from childhood, from growing up in a different state. I think you knew your audience as well, knowing that all of us here are either tenured with the chapter or brand new, the group of us here. I think when you were talking about all the things that you got out of Toastmasters up until this point, it gave us that hook to keep listening and to continue attending meetings to learn more about public speaking. The only thing that I would say for areas of improvement was when I noticed that you were rubbing your hands a little bit. I think everyone has a tendency to put their hands in their pockets, like me, if I'm nervous, or behind my back. I think when you were trying to fish for words to say you were doing this a little bit. But I think you were very passionate, and I actually wanted to find a newspaper the second you started talking about the advice sections to see where it was, because I'm usually going to the finance and sports section, but next time I'll do the advice section.
Story time, and Shannon is here to tell her tale. Shannon, experienced speaker, a lot of great things you did. One was a question. If you're giving a speech, a question engages and pulls the audience in. You notice how Shannon gives us questions. Feel yourself getting more involved as the questions are asked. You pause enough so you can think about the questions too. It's really great. Really well, I think. And relevant. Exactly as you mentioned, relevant. Something, here come better speakers. What more relevant than stories? You want to really sell something, you sell it with a story. Examples tell, stories sell. So it's very relevant. Works very well in this sort of environment. And technique. So many speakers will forget about technique. Like all the great thing, you can become better, you can do it, whatever, but no technique. You gave us a technique, a way to do it. The technique was, in case you didn't know, was watch soap operas. Go to advice columns. That's a technique. Become better, get interested in stories. That's what you want people to do. How do you do that? Advice columns, soap operas. Soap operas I thought about, but advice columns, what a great idea. Just want to go out and check one of those advice columns right now. Now you're very advanced speakers. Thinking about things to develop you is going to be a challenge, but it's also going to be at a very high level. So if this is something that people aren't quite comfortable thinking or seems picky, please forgive me. First thing is you, which you did very well, with one minor exception. You asked, how many of you? As you know, world champion Craig Valentine says, there's only one of me. You ask how many of you, your audience, it automatically makes you a bunch of individuals. Have you ever? Did you ever? That connects. A lot of people do that. It's okay. You had 2/3 of what Craig Valentine says you need for a story. You had things which were known, understood the background, and things that were heard. You had the dialogue going on. The thing you didn't have, and many speakers don't have, is seen. You're telling a story, make sure things are seen, known, and heard. What does it look like? In my story, I was trying to describe what does Rocky look like. So you can picture him in your mind as you're going through the story. What does your mother look like? What does the neighbor look like? What does your friend look like? These are key. And then finally, something you did that I did a little bit, though I try not to do in my talking, was get caught up in your story. And maybe you've had this happen in your speeches. You get caught up in your story, and you start talking all about your story, and all of a sudden, again, you forget about the audience. Step out of your story, especially in situations where you say, soap operas. Do you like soap operas? Are you a big soap operas fan? My mom loved soap operas. Just connect with the audience right there, especially at those big moments where you get this big revelation about something and a strong reaction from your character. First, check with your audience. If they're soap operas lovers, yeah, we love soap operas, you don't want to say, well, my mom, and no one likes soap operas. My mom didn't like them. You want to make sure you make that connection. Great speech, and Shannon, something I definitely took away with it. You made me very eager to go to my next Toastmaster meeting and my next Toastmaster story.